Hey guys, it's Ramon from Modern. As always, I hope you guys are having a nice day. Today in this video, I wanted to review a portrait lens that I've been using for the past year. Bought it in 2020 and have been using it as my go-to lens for portraits, and that is the Tamron 85mm f1.8 with vibration control or image stabilization. So I've been using this lens for about a year. So I've had about maybe 7 or 8 or so portrait shoots that I use it on. So I'm going to be reviewing it in this video today. So as I've mentioned earlier, I purchased this lens about a year ago, back in 2020, and primarily just for the purposes of taking portraits. 85mm wasn't a focal length that I was used to or that I'd used normally before, but I heard 85mm is probably a decent range to shoot portraits. And then now in the current climate that was 2020, it made perfect sense because, for one, social distancing became kind of a huge factor, and having something like an 85mm or anything above that is a huge asset to have in your kit, just because it helps put that social distancing, and hopefully it puts people at ease that you're not crowding them and you're having kind of a nice barrier to separate you from your subject. Other lenses that I also considered picking up was the Canon version of this lens, the Canon 85mm f1.8. Very similar to this lens, only it doesn't have image stabilization, and this does have image stabilization. So that was kind of one of the things that prompted me to go in this route. Another lens that I was thinking about was the Canon 50 1.4, but I heard kind of mixed reviews about it. I still need to rent it and test it and just kind of evaluate it for myself and see how well that lens actually does. But yeah, the 85 1.8 from Tamron was just, vibration control or image stabilization was just one of the things that I wanted to have in almost all my lenses. So yeah, so at the time we're recording this video, the Tamron 85 falls under the $750 mark. Please visit the link in the description to find more accurate prices for this lens. As I always say, prices tend to fluctuate. On the used market, I've seen it fall around maybe $600 to $650. So some of the pros of this lens are that, one, it's an f1.8, so there's a nice blurry background that you get when you're shooting portraits. I also like the size of it. It's kind of nice and compact. Not too compact, but I had a Sigma 35 1.4 that was way bigger than this. But I really like using this lens. I like the fact that I really fell in love with the 85mm focal range when I'm shooting portraits. It's a nice, as I said in the beginning of the video, it's a nice focal range that gives you nice separation from your subject, and hopefully it makes it comfortable in this weird times of social distancing. Now, to discuss some of the cons about this lens, my main reason for buying it was image stabilization. And I gotta say, that was probably one of the biggest letdowns of this lens, is that the image stabilization coming from the lens it's not really that great. From my testing, when it came to video, it didn't seem like image stabilization had a factor. I'm using this lens with the EOS R that also has an adapter, so I'm thinking that maybe that plays in a factor, but then again, the adapter is an EF mount built by Canon. I mean, there might be some type of, third party, Tamron's from a third-party manufacturer. It's not made by Canon. Maybe there's some type of issues with that. And maybe if I had a traditional EF mount system, maybe the image stabilization would be better. So another issue I have with the Tamron lens is that to update the firmware on the lens, you have to purchase a tap-on console from Tamron in order to update the firmware. I do wish there was just like a more convenient way to update the firmware on this lens, but currently that's probably the only means of doing it. It's pretty much like Sigma has their own type of console that you have to use to update their firmware or make little micro adjustments. So it's kind of the same ballpark when it comes to updating the firmware on these lenses. Another con that I wanted to bring up is the vibration control on this lens, or the image stabilization. I don't know why they call it vibration control. Maybe, yeah. It's really easy to switch it off. I mean, maybe that's the thing that was happening when I was using this lens, that maybe I just didn't know it, but I've, wrapped up a shoot and I've just like noticed that vibration control was set to off, and it was just like, it was ridiculous, but very easy to set this off. Makes it kind of a liability to use sometimes, but yeah. So to wrap up, do I think the Tamron 85 is worth the high price point? Long story short, no, I probably wouldn't. If I knew the image stabilization was like not as great out of the box, I probably wouldn't have picked it up. I probably would have just settled on the Canon 85 f1.8, the Canon's own branded one. That being said, with the new wave of Canon cameras, the R6, the R5, it might not matter. Image stabilization might not matter a whole lot, since the in-body image stabilization in the R5 and the R6 is pretty good. I haven't tested out the R6, but I've tested out the R5, and non-stabilized lenses work really well with the R5. But personally, being that image stabilization is just average, I probably wouldn't buy it again. With the caveat of saying I haven't tried the other alternatives to the 85 millimeter focal length. Like there's an 85 millimeter that Canon has, there's an 85 millimeter that Yongnuo, I think that's how you pronounce it, also has, and then there's a new RF mount version for the 85, the RF 85 millimeter f1.8, which is essentially, it has image stabilization, so it's essentially just the same as this, and it might even be cheaper. So that's kind of why I'm like, would this be something that I would buy again? And knowing the price, knowing the alternatives out there, I probably wouldn't. But I still love the image quality that you get from some of the photos that I've taken with this lens. So finally, I'd like to say thank you for joining me in today's episode. If you yourself are an owner of this lens, I'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences with it. It's kind of a mixed bag, but I won't totally be of the opinion that I'm going to throw it away. It's still a great lens to use, but it's just kind of a letdown with that image stabilization. So finally, I'd like to say thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. If you've liked this episode, please, as always, like, subscribe, and share the channel. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.